This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want Magic singles or sealed product, use my link in the description. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's Saturday. That means it's time for Nitsa Notes, my weekly vlog series about limited Magic. We're still in the early stages of Avatar: The Last Airbender Limited. It's been the first week of it being online for everyone to access on Magic Arena. So while it's early and I don't feel like I have so many drafts under my belt and we don't have so much data that I can make really strong assertions about individual cards, I do have some feelings about the broad strokes of the format, what's working and what's not working. And so basically it's my first impressions of the format, 10 or 12 drafts in, what I'm experiencing so far and what I think that can tell us about this limited format. Before we get into that though, let me tell you about this video's special sponsor, Into the AM. They've sponsored my content regularly for the last few years, and I'm always happy to share their products with you. They're an apparel company that is probably best known for all of their graphic tees, but they also make a lot of really great clothing, outerwear, especially for this time of year. This Henley I'm wearing and this jacket are both from Into the AM, and you can also get hoodies, sweatpants, you can get all kinds of stuff there at this point, in addition to their usual awesome graphic tees. And it's a great time to check out Into the AM because right now it is their Black Friday sale, and there's up to 60% off store-wide. So you can check out Into the AM by clicking on the link in the description, and if you use my code NITSAHONE at checkout, you get an additional 10% off. Their clothes are great and comfortable, and I think you should check them out. All right, so let's take a look now at my big takeaways for the format. So I think the format is fairly assertive. You can't be doing things in the early game that aren't adding to the board in some substantial way. There's not a lot of time for you to do like little dirtily things. Example, Sparring Dummy and Leaves from the Vine are both cards that I really liked in the set review. Both of them don't feel that good, and that's because neither of them are good at pressuring your opponent, which is something you need to be doing, or keeping your opponent from pressuring you, which is the other thing that you can do. You don't necessarily have to be curving out, but you need to be interacting with your opponent in some way or another. Otherwise, your opponent's early curve out will allow them to go wide, they'll be able to attack you, and you're not going to be in a good place. And the fact that this format is this assertive results in a number of things. For one thing, tricks are good. Tricks have been good in a lot of limited formats over the last few years, but it's actually been a few sets since there were like several tricks that were good. But basically all the 1-mana ones in this set are quality cards or better. And anytime that's the case, we're talking about a format that is pretty aggressive. Some of them even save creatures from removal and stuff like that. Another thing is that basically every color can go wide in the format. Usually it's like red and white can go wide, sure. But once you throw in earthbending, black and green can actually go pretty wide too. Blue can't go wide quite as effectively, but it has pretty much better interaction than everyone else, and that helps make up for it. So the fact that everyone can go wide like that means that somewhat expensive, inefficient removal is worse than usual because spot removal doesn't usually solve your problem. You need to be spending like 4 mana or less, and the removal needs to be able to deal with a wide variety of things for it to be effective. Once the removal gets a little more specific or a little too expensive, it ends up not feeling very good in the format. Firebending Lesson, stuff like that, Heartless Act, those are still good because they're so cheap. But there are some removal spells that don't feel as good as they normally would. The Swamp Snare Trap, for example, has some problems being as expensive as it is, not being able to take down enough things. So there is removal in the format that's not great because it's too expensive or too narrow. And that's because so many cards allow people to go wide in this set in a way that we don't see in most sets. So because the format's assertive, you need to either be interacting or adding bodies to the board in the early game that are meaningful, that allow you to pressure your opponent. And you don't want to be playing expensive removal. That's one big broad strokes thing. The format is assertive, relatively fast. Another one is that red, white, and blue, I think, are the top 3 colors. It's no surprise that those are the 3 colors that are, red and white are the best at curving out and going wide. Blue is the best at interacting in the early game with cheap spells that allow them to set the opponent back, or you can counter their spell for 2 mana or whatever. And green and black, meanwhile, are in worse shape. I don't think there's any color in the set that's bad. That's not a thing. I think the set has relatively good color balance, but I do think that green and black are a couple of steps, or at least one step behind red, white, and blue. And that's because those colors aren't nearly as good at adding early bodies to the board and pressuring the opponent in a meaningful way. Black is really reliant on removal, which feels a little less good in this format overall. Neither green nor black have a common, either it has to do with the depth of comments. Neither of them have a common I'm like super excited to see either. And that all creates a few problems for green and black, while red, white, and blue are doing better than they are. But I do think all 5 colors and all the color pairs are playable, though I will say it feels like especially red, white, and white, blue are really good color pairs, and those are the best ones at, curving out and attacking the opponent. Another early takeaway, just to confirm something I said in the set review, is that shrines are in fact a trap, based on everything I've said so far, right? Cards like them that don't really add to the board, that are slow, that need you to set up your mana well, they don't work. So don't try to do shrines if you want to win. You can do it if you think it's fun, but those are in fact not very good. Two of the big synergy points in the set are really easy to come by, and I thought they would be, but they're even easier, and those are allies and lessons. So almost no matter what color pair you're in, you end up with a bunch of allies. So any card that says ally on it ends up being pretty good. The 3 mana 2/2 white creature that gets a +1/+1 counter when an ally enters, normally that kind of card's not very good. Your deck has so many allies in this format that it's a solid playable, and I think that's a pretty good indication of how good allies are, how easy they are to come by, and that's part of what makes, the white and red color pairs so good. It is interesting because green is also, one of the ally colors, green-white in particular, and it's a pretty good deck too, but I think a lot of that just comes from the white cards being so good. Similarly, most of the lesson payoffs are even better than I expected. I wasn't super high, for example, on First Time Flyer or Fire Nation Cadets in the set review. Didn't think either of them were bad, but lessons are so easy to come by that both of these can get going in the early game reasonably well. Fire Nation Cadets, fire bending really ends up being quite good in the game, either because you're buffing it or casting out spells and stuff like that. First Time Flyer is just a 2 mana 2/3 flyer a big chunk of the time. And then the uncommon trio of cards that like lessons, they're like all build around A's. Boomy being one of them. The 2 mana draw 3 when you have 3 lessons in the graveyard being one of them. And, it's probably not a build around A, but the 2 mana removal spell, it's more like a B+. All 3 of those have been great. Lesson decks are really good. And while that might sound strange with what I said about the format being assertive, you can cast lessons early to interact with your opponent. And then in the late game, you're like, oh, I have 3 lessons in my graveyard. I'm going to play Boomy and pull way ahead, or I'm going to draw 3 cards, or I can kill whatever you're playing. So the things that say get 3 lessons in the graveyard are all easier to achieve than I expected on the whole. And I thought it was going to be doable. In the set review, it's not like I was like, you're never going to do it. But it happens even more, and getting 1 lesson in the graveyard is almost trivial in those decks, even in the early game, because there are so many cards that work out with lesson stuff. So allies and lessons are both things that it's easier to get going than it even looked in the set review, which is saying something because it looked pretty easy when we were looking there. Basically, it's not 100% true, but if you were going to go into a draft and just assume every card that's an ally payoff and a lesson payoff is good, you're going to be right a lot more than you're wrong. And I think that says a lot, because some of these payoffs look like they'd be a little too underwhelming a little too often, but they're better than that. Now, the uncommon trio I did like a lot in the set review. I think I gave the blue and red ones Bs and Boomy a C+, but like I said, they all feel significantly better than that, even if they are build-arounds to an extent where you need to get lessons, but lessons are everywhere. They're, again, almost trivial to get going. Maybe not quite as trivial as allies, because it's a little more obvious when you're picking up lessons, where you look at your deck and it says it has a bunch of lessons in it, and you're like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. With allies, you can not even be trying, and you're like, oh, random 4 mana 4/4 haste rare that likes allies. How many allies in my deck? And you always look, and there's like 12. You know what I mean? So those cards all ended up being quite good. And then in terms of the bending mechanics, I think airbending, firebending, and earthbending are all at least a little bit better than I thought they were. And I think airbending is a lot better than it looked on paper. I liked airbending. I liked how it was flexible. I liked that you could use it as removal, temporary removal of sorts. I liked that you could use it to recast things and get an interest trigger, get your creature out from under an aura. I like that it could do all the things that it can do. None of that comes as a huge shock to me, but just how good it feels when you have a card that enters, or you cast it and it replaces itself, and you get airbending. Those cards have all pretty much ended up being good. Every card that says airbending on it, more or less, has ended up being better than I expected. I mean, Aang the Last Airbender and Glider's Staff, that enters trigger feels a lot closer to Banisher Priest than I expected it to. And both of those cards are cards that I didn't like Glider Staff at all, actually. And I thought Aang was going to be pretty good. I think I gave him a C+. But both of those have ended up being among White's best uncommons. They're both really great cards, because airbending is really good. It's another mechanic that helps convey some of the problems not being assertive in this format has, because it's another sort of tempo mechanic. It's almost like bouncing something, or you temporarily exile it. And then it can also save creatures from those removal spells and things like that when you're doing it at instant speed with airbending lesson. So airbending has, I think, been significantly better than I expected. Like I said, I think basically every card with airbending is solid or better. That's just kind of how it has panned out. That mechanic is just way better than I expected, even accounting for all of the flexibility that I knew that it had. It's just a mechanic that you can't get a full feel for, I don't think, without playing it. To me at least. Other people may have evaluated it better. For me, it looked like it was going to be nice, but not insane. And with Glider Staff specifically, I remember in the set review, I was like, how good would this be if it didn't have airbending? It'd be pretty terrible, right? And I was like, with airbending, it's playable, but not very good. But it turns out airbending is a huge upgrade on that card. And overall, it's been quite good. That's one of the specific cards where I can say right now, like I was very wrong about, is Glider's Staff, just from playing with and against it a whole bunch. I was less wrong about Aang, but still wrong about him as well. So firebending and earthbending both are not to the same degree that airbending is better than I expected, but they are both better than I expected too. It's pretty rare that you can't find something to do with firebending mana. It helps that a lot of the creatures with it have stuff built in, but they gave us tons of instants in all the colors that you can cast more effectively with them, in addition to all those activated abilities. And so when you firebend, especially if it's like mid-game, and that's part of what makes that 1 mana 1/2 that can firebend too when you have a lesson in the graveyard, part of what makes it good is because in the early game when you've got like gas in your hand, there's just so much you can do with it in terms of casting instants or using it on activated abilities or whatever. It's not quite Dark Ritual every time you attack, but sometimes it feels pretty close. And so firebending, which I thought was going to be good, and I thought they had seeded the set effectively with multiple ways to spend that mana. There's even more than I expected. I thought about clues, I thought about instants, I thought about activated abilities, but again, it's pretty hard with firebending to have known that all of those things are going to be so plentiful that it's really not hard to find a way to use it. And earthbending, which I've already talked about a little bit, is better than I expected because I knew that it was flexible too, and that it had this angle where you could kind of either go wide with it or make one big creature with it. And then it also has sacrifice upside, all things I acknowledged. But for the most part, all of those things are even better than I expected. Like you can go so wide with some earthbending cards, like Badger Mole, probably green's best common, 5 mana, 4/4. It's still not quite as good as getting a 3/3 token, but it's closer than I thought it would be to getting a 3/3 token. Like, I don't know, 85% of the way there when you earthbend something. I think it's actually a 2/2 token in the case of the Badger Mole. But the point is that earthbending has so many applications in the set. It's good if you need to go wide and protect yourself. It's good if you need one big creature to go after your opponent. It's good if you need to go wide and use that to attack your opponent. So it's been better than I expected to. All three of those bending mechanics have been. Water bending's been about as good as I expected. It's pretty easy to get going, but not markedly worse or better than I was really thinking. But I do think, especially air bending, like one big takeaway I want to give to you right away, if you're basing the set, how you feel about the set on my set reviews, all the airbending cards are better than I thought they would be. It is a good mechanic because of its flexibility. It can give you tempo, it can protect things, it can rebuy interest triggers. Again, all things I mentioned in the set review, but way better than I thought they would be. All right, so that will do it for this week. Those are my big takeaways. Format is assertive. You got to be interacting or pressuring your opponent in the early game. Red, white, and blue are really good. Green and black, less good. Shrines are a trap. That one is maybe pretty obvious, but sometimes those decks work out after I think they won't, and not so much. Allies and lesson synergies are super easy to come by. Ally payoffs and lessons and lesson payoffs are all over the place. Much easier to get going than it looked on paper. And the airbending is really good, is the biggest takeaway from that last section. Whereas firebending and earthbending are also good, but not markedly, like in a huge way, better than I expected they'd be. Next week, I'll have more drafts under my belt and we'll have data to look at, and I'll be able to tell you exactly how wrong I was about some of these cards, some of which I mentioned in this video, more of which I'll be talking about next week as well. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on past videos like my set review, the draft videos for this set on the channel, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.